Ultimately, the key to a good travel portrait really comes down to two key lessons. The first is to own it, and the second is don't be a public nuisance. Hi, I'm a photographer who is usually way more comfortable behind the lens than in front of it. But since I've been traveling a lot this year around the world and blogging about my experiences, I've really also had to learn how to take and pose as the subject of a lot of my travel self-portraits. And so I thought I'd put together a video today sharing some of the key lessons, tips and tricks that I've learned in this entire year of traveling without a tripod. The first lesson that I have is the most crucial one, and it's largely psychological, and that is to own it. Own the fact that you want a good travel portrait of yourself. Now, if you look at the behind the scenes of most fashion and street style photo shoots, you'll notice that a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of people go into achieving that perfect capture. And so, to me, it seems pretty ridiculous that we expect the same kind of portrait to result from a 15-second capture by yourself in front of some sort of tourist attraction. I think for young girls in particular, there is an undercurrent of judgment, of scorn, and this feeling that there is particular shallowness or superficiality associated with wanting to put on a pretty outfit and pose in front of a tourist attraction, as though it kind of diminishes or takes away from the entire travel experience if you come out with a set of photos of yourself looking good. And when you really think about it, it's pretty ridiculous. I know it's made fun of, in the boyfriends of Instagram pages and other associated memes, and I'm not saying that they're not funny, because they are so funny and relatable a lot of the time. But I think that we can't be blind to the fact that the undercurrent of judgment there is that somehow your travel experience is less meaningful or less legitimate even than people who don't go to those lengths to take a portrait. Well, if Legally Blonde taught me anything, it's that looking good doesn't diminish from your intelligence, your thoughtfulness, or really any part of you at all. It's merely a facet of yourself, and it shouldn't be a facet to be ashamed about. You're going to have to be a little bit extra. You may spend a little bit more time at a place than everyone else, but if that's what you want, own up to it, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So my second tip is don't be a public nuisance, and this ties directly into my first tip, because while I am all for being unapologetic about the fact that you want an amazing travel shot of yourself, that comes with a caveat that you should not let that excuse unlawful behavior. It should not be a reason for you to behave dangerously, to put yourself or your photographer in danger, for you to flout traffic laws or laws and rules in the places that you're visiting. And you definitely shouldn't be a nuisance to other people who are also trying to enjoy the area. So now we're going to move on to a slightly more practical question, which is, so how do I get this photo that I've now committed to? So I actually came up with a way to take photos completely by myself with my DSLR. But unfortunately, this involves getting my bag very dirty. It usually involved me putting the backpack on the ground and kind of using various things I had in my backpack to angle my DSLR up. And so this technique, while it achieved some pretty good photos, I would not recommend on a general basis, just because you take significant risk in both trusting that your bag and camera being unattended will be okay. And because you're using your self-timer, it's also trusting that A, people aren't going to accidentally walk in front of your shot and kick your camera over or anything, and B, it will only really work if you're in a place where the background can be captured by a camera and a bag placed on the ground or on a seat. So it is a way to do this, but it definitely wasn't the way I took the majority of my travel photos. One of the easiest ways to take travel self-portraits is obviously to take a tripod with you. But as a solo traveler and as someone who walks a lot every day when I'm traveling, it just was not a practical option for me. Ultimately, the way I got most of my travel portraits was to ask someone else to take them for me. Now, if you have a travel companion with you, a friend, congratulations, because you already have a trusted tripod with you. Since you have them there, it is only a matter of communicating and teaching them how to use your camera. But I was traveling alone a lot of the time throughout this year, and so basically the thing I had to master was, who do I ask to take a travel portrait of me? My go-to tip is to always try and go for tourists in the area, because they're usually wanting similar things to you, so you can kind of do a, I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine situation, where you take their photo for them and they do the same for you. And in that group of people, my go-to is usually to find someone with another DSLR, because you'd hope that as a fellow photographer, they would know how to work their way around your camera better. The other type of people that I go for are usually couples, because they tend to be a little bit less on their guard than someone traveling completely alone. And so they're usually quite comfortable, especially if you're a solo traveler, to kind of help you out. So when asking someone to take a photo of you, communication is absolutely key. This applies to friends, it applies to strangers, it basically applies to a lot of situations as a photographer. So what I mean by that is, when you hand your DSLR to someone, from experience, most people are just dying to be told exactly what to do. They're happy for you to boss them around, even bodily, like drag them to where you want them to be. And so you should approach people already having prepared the shot that you want in your head. So sometimes a useful tip that I've found is to take a photo of the person first, because that allows you to get the shot as the photographer behind the lens. You position them properly, you check your exposure and all your settings are correct first, and then you take a photo of them, ask them to come where you're standing and show them the photo. Because also people tend to do a lot better as photographers if they know exactly what they're aiming to achieve. And when you are showing people your camera, make sure you keep speaking. Tell them, okay, this is the shutter button, this is what you press to focus. Like, really just walk them through every single step. And I found that that usually makes people a lot more comfortable, because let's face it, a giant black DSLR can be quite intimidating, especially if, the person's only used to shooting on their phones. This year, I've also been converted to the wonders of a selfie stick, and I really don't know why I was so prejudiced against it in the past, because it's a really great way to take photos of yourself when you're traveling, especially if you're not that picky about the photo quality, if you just want, evidence that you were there. A selfie stick's a great way for getting things done quickly. It's good if you have social anxiety, and even if you're traveling with a friend, it's a great way to get like a really decent shot of the two of you without one of you sort of sacrificing half your face. If you're not happy with the photo, just don't be afraid to ask them to do it again. I think as a photographer, if someone told me, oh, I feel like I don't look the best in this photo, or can we do this again because I want to try something different with my pose, I really wouldn't think twice of it. If you're traveling to a place and you've, spent your hard-earned money to go there, you only get that one shot. Don't settle for a mediocre photo and then regret it later. So the final section of this video deals with posing. One of my biggest tips is to study up, really, to expose yourself to fashion magazines, to study Instagrammers, to look at inspiration and look at how people are positioning their bodies in relation to the camera. Literally, a lot of my posing lessons came from being like a religious consumer of Australia's Next Top Model series, because I loved watching the entire process of the photo shoot. I loved seeing what the models did, what the photographers did, and how that all worked together. One of the key tips is to work with your environment. So I actually adore windy days because it results in really dramatic photos. Face the wind, flick out your hair, let it kind of blow your hair away from you. It creates for really dynamic and interesting photos. Another thing is to always try and interact with your environment. So if you're in front of a railing or a tree, don't feel like you have to stand in front of it like a soldier, like stock still and look really proper and posy. You can lean a hand against the railing, you can lean against the tree, make it feel like you're actually part of the environment and not just kind of standing in front of it. One of my favorite things is when I find mirrors in the background. So when I went to an Olafur Eliasson exhibition in Denmark, the entire exhibition was filled with mirrors, and that's automatically a self-portrait opportunity, and you don't even have to ask someone else to take it for you. Another tip that I have is to vary the angles of your face. So I've seen this a lot in people's travel photos, and I'm guilty of it myself, but sometimes you fall into kind of this default nice travel smile, and while it's like perfectly serviceable and pleasant, it doesn't make for the most dynamic of photos. So one tip that I learned from Coco Roca in an episode of Australia's Next Top Model:
think of your head as a clock, change the angle.
And so trying out these different angles may bring out a cheekbone or jawline that you didn't know existed, or it may emphasize your features in a way that's very beautiful. Some of my friends have absolutely gorgeous profiles, and so it took me telling them, can you turn your face like sideways to the camera, for them to even notice that they did. Another thing is to be aware of your expression in the photos and how expression can bring out completely different sides of you. So for example, my friend Nora is one of the sweetest and loveliest girls that I've met, and while we were traveling together, my photos of her at the beginning would always look very sweet, very approachable, and perfectly like lovely. Like she looks like someone that you would trust to take care of billions of puppies. But I knew there was a supermodel inside her. I just didn't know how to bring it out until we got to a ferry to Russia, and I told her to look pissed off, and bam, like that was the key. So don't be afraid to vary up your facial expressions either. Another key tip, and something that I don't see very often, is when people use their clothing. So be mindful of what you're wearing, because all of these elements come together to create that shot. If you're wearing a long coat, you know, swish it around, throw out the back of the coat behind you to emphasize how long and swishy it is, basically. If you have a scarf, snuggle up in it, use it to bring out something different in the way that you're posing. Something else that I like to do is, if you're in pants, if you're in dark pants, make sure that you try and create some angles with your legs so that you don't read in the photo as someone with just like one giant trunk for a leg. If I'm sitting at a windowsill and I know that I'm going to be a silhouette in front of it, I like to put my leg up and create a kind of angle with one of my legs so that there are some shapes created in the image. The final thing is to be aware of some really basic visual illusions that will help you create a better photo. So one of the most common ones is that taking photos from a slightly lower angle will visually elongate you. So even if your photographer is only slightly bent down and shooting upwards at you, it creates the illusion of slightly longer legs. Something that I also like to do is to create dynamic movement by shifting my weight between one foot and another, as though I am in the middle of walking, but not actually walking, because taking walking shots is really hard to get right. However, if you're just shifting your weight from one foot to the other, that is going to give you a lot more control over the movement, and so you can time it a lot better. That being said, don't be afraid to jump around a bit. Don't be afraid to use some dance moves, dance around, like be silly and playful in front of the camera. And that's going to make for some really, really interesting photos as well. And remember, if you're shooting from a slightly lower angle, make sure you lower your chin just a little bit, just so that it doesn't look as though they're shooting up your nose. I hope these tips help, and hopefully I'll be back with some more videos on the travel experience and on anything else you guys want to know. Thank you for your time, and bye!